Enjoy.
Good morning. I'd like to ask you to close your eyes for a second and imagine my classroom. Down the back, a group of boys are working on their fantasy football. 2 rows up, a girl is doodling on her notebook, and another group in the corner are giggling over hairstyles. Sound familiar, huh? As teachers, we are at the forefront of an engagement crisis. Our students have already had unlimited access to knowledge at their fingertips for a long time, and motivation is scarcer than ever. And it already was, even before the AI catalyst. But when that happened, the value proposition of teaching collapsed even further. Why should students bother with the friction of learning when ChatGPT can summarize, explain, and regurgitate information in seconds? The truth is, we actually already know the answer to that, because we as adults need to know the why behind our learning in order to become engaged. We need to know what's in it for me, and our students, they're no different. Every day, we are faced with the impossible choice. Do we spend more time on the learning, or do we sacrifice the learning in order to ensure compliance, control, and surveillance? The alternative is giving over to the distraction and apathy that we see in our classrooms, a classroom of anarchy. And the consequences are real, not just for the test scores, but for the futures of our citizens and the generation that we are trying to shape. Some say that student agency is the solution. That's cool. It's expected as well. But the problem is the implementation. How do you implement student agency when what that actually looks like is trying to have a calm parliamentary debate in the middle of an ongoing uprising? We need practical solutions that we can implement within the structures that we are working in, so our curriculum and our classrooms. If we don't, we're going to end up creating a generation of passive consumers at a time when the world really needs innovation, adaptability, and critical thinking. But what if there was a third option? What if we could give those students their why? What if we could transform our classroom from dictatorship to democracy by reimagining the spaces of our learning? We need to find those spaces for student agency within the structure rather than trying to dismantle it and start from scratch. So how do we do that? We need to look for the pockets of agency within the structures, within our subjects. All of us have them, all of the grade levels, all of the subjects. We need to find those spaces for student choice by looking at the entire system. That's how I did it in my classroom anyway. I looked at the interconnected learning, and I looked for those little elements of wiggle room, those places where I could give the students what they so desperately needed. Now, my students co-create pretty much everything in the course with me. But what they really like is being able to vote on the case studies that we're focusing on, how they're going to demonstrate their understanding. They even vote on the deadlines and what learning resources to use. The constraints of the curriculum are still there. The learning objectives haven't changed. It's just their journey through the topics that has become a negotiation. So how did I implement this, and how can you implement it? I started with learning contracts. So I gave the students the responsibility that they kind of crave. They were able to decide on their personal learning goals within the curriculum. The course objectives stayed the same, but they were able to add or tweak elements that were personalized for them. But I structured the choice. I didn't give them a free rein. I gave them 3 options, maybe 4, every time they were supposed to make a decision. I also mixed the governance, because different activities in a classroom require different levels of authority and engagement. Content areas, for example, that kind of requires structure. There's only so much change I can make, right? So it's more like a constitutional republic. The process, though, the decisions about how we're going to get there, that allowed more space for student choice, more like a democracy. Classroom management, on the other hand, that's on me. We need more authority, so I'm more like a dictator in that place. I call this efficacy. I'm taking adult learning principles and applying them to the needs of student or adolescent development. I'm recognizing that our teenagers don't rely on us anymore as the main vehicle for their knowledge. But they still need the scaffolding that we're used to giving them, and they require relevance and purpose within their learning. Finally, they thrive when you give them just the right amount of responsibility. This change, when applied properly, mirrors geopolitical evolution. I move from my teacher-controlled democracy through a period of transition where, yeah, okay, there's a bit of anarchy, and finally end up in a democracy, where student and teacher work together towards the same goal. But as the president, the final decision still rests with you. So what happens in a classroom when I apply this co-creation? How do the students react? Some love it, others not so much. But that resistance is not a sign of a failure. More than anything, it shows that we're challenging that passive learning model that they have become so used to. Now, my classroom is a hub of activity on those days we're working on projects, or a genuine space for learning dialogue when we're talking about content. The fantasy football, pretty much forgotten. Just as geopolitics evolves through that dialogue between the governing systems and in the citizens, so too can your classroom change. How do we get through that new world order? We look for the pockets. Every curriculum, every grade, every subject has those spaces for learning engagement. We reimagine our role within the system, and we move from sole authority to experienced guide. The question isn't if we give our students voice. The question really is, how much voice are you willing to give your students? Thank you.